John Stuart Mill is considered the main representative of classical utilitarianism. In his famous essay, Utilitarianism, he defends this moral philosophical position against criticism and further develops Jeremy Bentham's quantitative utilitarianism. His system of thought is still relevant today and finds its way into political and social discussions. John Stuart Mill was an English philosopher, politician, and economist. He lived from 1806 to 1873. His father, James Mill, was a close friend of Jeremy Bentham and an ardent supporter of utilitarianism. He wanted to change and reform society and raised his sons strictly in this spirit. John Stuart learns Greek at the age of 3 and is taught utilitarian ideas. At the age of 16, John Stuart Mill founds the Utilitarian Society together with friends. Here, they discuss liberal ideas and political reforms. He is also a member of the Philosophical Radicals, a reform movement to which his father James and Jeremy Bentham belonged, and which later forms the Liberal Party in the English House of Commons. Like his father, Mill works for the East India Company. When the company is dissolved, he receives a generous pension that provides him with financial security. He works as a publicist, journalist, and author, later even becoming a member of the Liberal Party in the English House of Commons for a short time. He is close friends with Harriet Taylor, a well-known women's rights activist whom he later marries. Together with her, he works as a social reformer for women's and workers' rights, universal suffrage, and universal minimum social security. His essay, On Liberty, is published in 1859. In it, he argues for the protection of individual freedoms from state restrictions and against the terror of public opinion, that is primarily for freedom of action and opinion. His main thesis is that state interference in individual freedoms is only justified if there is a threat of harm to others. Mill is considered the founding father of liberalism. However, his best-known work is the essay Utilitarianism. In it, he aims to correct weaknesses in Bentham's concept and defend utilitarianism against criticism. This essay is still the most widely read and discussed moral philosophy text in the English-speaking world today. In order to understand why and how Mill further developed Bentham's quantitative utilitarianism, it is important to know what criticism this moral philosophical position was subjected to at the time. Bentham took the view that moral action should strive for as much pleasure and as little pain as possible for all those affected. All pleasures are of equal value. He developed the hedonistic calculus for calculating the pleasure-pain balance of human actions. In 1840, the Scottish writer and historian Thomas Carlyle criticized Bentham's utilitarianism as a pig philosophy, a philosophy fit for swine. If people only strived for pleasure and human life had no higher purpose than pleasure, they were no better than pigs. The morality of utilitarianism, so the criticism, could just as well apply to pigs. Mill also defines happiness as pleasure and the absence of pain. Unhappiness is pain and the privation of pleasure. Actions are morally right if they tend to promote happiness, that is, if they are a means of achieving pleasure and avoiding pain. And actions are morally wrong if they tend to bring about the opposite of happiness, pain, and lead to the privation of pleasure. However, it is not about the greatest happiness of the person acting, but about the greatest happiness overall. So far, so good. That sounds a lot like Jeremy Bentham. But how does Mill respond to the criticism that utilitarianism is a pig philosophy? Mill argues that utilitarianism is misunderstood by its opponents. In Mill's view, some forms of pleasure are more desirable and valuable than others. According to Mill, the value of a pleasure does not depend exclusively on its quantity. Quality must also be taken into account. Only few people would choose to lower themselves to the level of an animal, even if they are promised that they will be allowed to fully enjoy the pleasures of the animal. Would you like to trade places with a pig and give up your humanity for it, even if you could have a wonderful pig life? Probably not. This is the difference between quantitative and qualitative utilitarianism. While Bentham only considers pleasure in quantitative terms, and with him all pleasures, physical and intellectual, have the same value, Mill distinguishes between intellectual and physical pleasures. Intellectual pleasures are higher, as only humans can feel them. Mill writes, It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. But why actually? Why wouldn't we like to swap places with the satisfied pig? According to Mill, the dissatisfied human or Socrates can experience greater pleasure than the pig or the fool. He can also experience mental, intellectual pleasures, and according to Mill, these are of higher value. He is also aware of his imperfection and can strive for perfection. He has opportunities for comparison and is in a position to develop further. Moreover, he does not pursue all pleasures, but can use his reason to decide which pleasure he wants to pursue and which not. According to Mill, no human being would allow himself to be transformed into a lower animal, even if life were supposedly more pleasurable. He has too much pride, love of freedom, striving for independence, love of power, and above all dignity to allow himself to be turned into a pig. A person is capable of happiness. This lasts for a long time and requires the satisfaction of higher needs. A pig or fool, on the other hand, is only capable of contentment. This is short-lived and only requires the satisfaction of basic needs. So when Mill speaks of happiness or pleasure, he means long-term happiness, the pleasure that comes from intellectual activity and service to society. Education and social engagement are necessary for this kind of happiness. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig are a different opinion, it is because they only know their own side of the question. But who can distinguish and judge which pleasures are lower pleasures and which are higher pleasures? And who can competently judge what ultimately leads to the greatest possible happiness for the greatest possible number of people? Only people with the greatest horizon of experience, Mill calls them competent judges, who have experienced both physical and intellectual pleasures, can do this. This is because, measured in terms of self-awareness and self-observation, they have the best means of comparison. They know both sides, physical and intellectual pleasures, and, having experienced both, give clear preference to the intellectual pleasures. These pleasures are therefore more valuable than the others. The task of the competent judges is to assess and establish rules and obligations for action that then apply to all people. Intellectual elites are therefore of particular importance to Mill. In his view, only educated people should be able to be elected and help the uneducated masses to educate themselves and make wise decisions. Mill attaches great importance to education and upbringing. According to Mill, this is the only way to recognize what constitutes the greatest happiness for the greatest number and how it can be achieved. Only the educated citizen can act and decide morally correctly. Mill sees comprehensive education as the basis for achieving personal freedom and happiness. Only enlightened citizens can help shape the progress of a society. Mill even went so far as to propose multi-class suffrage based on education. Educated citizens should receive more votes. In this way, he wanted to prevent a tyranny of the uneducated majority. To ensure the common good, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, two rules must apply according to Mill. Everyone should show consideration for everyone else. And it must be ruled out that an individual acts against the common good. Here we see the link to Mill's idea of freedom. For Mill, freedom and utility are closely related, because in both cases, the overall good of society as a whole must always be kept in mind. Individual freedom ends where it restricts the freedom and well-being of others. Mill wants to create a society that contains the highest degree of justice and freedom. To achieve this, the individual must be protected from the power of the community and the community from the selfishness of the individual. A state must prevent personal development from being at the expense of the benefit of society as a whole. With his further development of qualitative utilitarianism, Mill defended utilitarianism against the criticism of the time. With his distinction between physical and mental pleasures, but also with his idea of competent judges and his emphasis on the importance of education and social commitment, he was able to remedy many of the weaknesses of Bentham's hedonistic calculus. Nevertheless, classical utilitarianism has been and continues to be heavily criticized. We will discuss the strengths and weaknesses of this moral philosophical position in the next video.